So let's start with the rapporteur, Anna Zaliewska, for ECR.
Excuse me, how much time I have?
4 minutes maximum.
Okay, thanks. Panie Przewodniczący, Szanowni Państwo, dyskusja o dwutlenku tytanu już właściwie się rozpoczęła.
Thank you, Chairman. The debate on titanium dioxide is already underway, colleagues. I must say that I wasn't persuaded by Mr. Hansen's arguments. It's not a question of belief, it's a question of solid evidence. I am opposed, having looked at all the documents, and with a view to the environment and protecting our citizens, I find that this debate has been dragging on for 2 years now, and yet there's still no fresh evidence. The Commission doesn't have any either. A very expensive study was commissioned on rats, and it was felt that the results could be extrapolated just as they were to humans. Well, of course, the important thing here is classification. We're talking about taking TiO2 upper category, saying it's a carcinogen, but within the context of health and safety at work. The reason for that is that most of the time the substance appears in powdered form. Well, first of all, we need to tackle this substance in the directive dealing with working conditions. Then what we're dealing with here is a situation where people would not actually be exposed to titanium dioxide in the same way as they are now. Furthermore, it's unacceptable, in the absence of any fresh studies, that we should change the classification in this way. The reason I say that is that titanium dioxide is used in thousands of products, and there are no studies, there's no evidence which would bear out the hypothesis that there are presumed threats to human health here. Titanium dioxide also has specific properties, particularly when it's in contact with nitrogen dioxide. We've no new evidence, no new analyses. So on top of that, there's no financial analysis that would give us a clear idea of the cost of replacing the substance. So against that full context, I think I have every reason to oppose this proposal. We need to analyze working conditions first of all. Perhaps the working conditions directive needs to be amended along these lines.
I have a discussion structured with the political groups. So starting with the EPP, who takes the floor for the EPP? Peter? No. Spiraki.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Well, I would like to explain that in principle we are not against the classification of titanium dioxide, but we, as EPP, find that the classification as potential or suspected carcinogen creates a lot of uncertainty and might have negative consequences in various industries, in the recycling process of the certain materials, and the downstream occupational health and safety standard. I note that the classification will only apply to wastes in powder form containing 1% or more of titanium dioxide. However, powder is not divided, and therefore it creates room for various interpretations that might affect projects even financed by the EU, such as the processing of bauxite residue. I also think that for such a critical decision to be made, more scientific evidence should be required. I understand that its harm to health has been proved by tests on rats, and I also recognize the time that it is required for such studies to be conducted and lead to safe conclusion. That's why we would like to vote in favor of the objections, since the Commission is ready to provide some further explanation and, of course, additional information on the proposal that the Commission has already tabled. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For S&D. Sorry.
Well, the person who should represent us here is not here. I don't know the topic, but I can tell you that S&D will not support the objection. But I will not be able to argue why, but this is our position. I do apologize.
It is science-based. So, for Renew, Mr. No, for Renew, Mr. Conrad.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Here we must distinguish the Renew Europe is not fully united on that. Majority of the group is against the objection with arguments that the cancer is a big risk and want to protect the workers. However, myself, I am a person coming from industrial affairs, so I know what people do, how to protect them, and I don't agree with the arguments of the chair of ECHA. The workers follow training, so even no matter on labeling, if they don't have good training, they will not be able to follow it. Here I see that there is no reason to question whether the compound is toxic or not, but whether there is a way how to find a sustainable way. And sustainable way is going via these occupational limits, because this can address both concerns on the health risk and as well of the professional agencies working with that chemical. And to accent, the risk is in the powder form, in high concentration and long exposure. This really means when operating with the powder, not with the final product which is produced and then being distributed over the citizens. So myself personally, I am in favor of this objection. Thank you.
Thank you. For the Greens, Ms. Paulus.
Yes, thank you very much. I must admit I'm a bit surprised because I've recognized the EPP on that you are very keen on fighting cancer. And so I find it a bit difficult to believe that now we should object to a label for cancerogenic substances. I think this is a little bit contradictory. And it is not as what some have pointed out that we need more scientific proof of that. I mean, we do have, as Mr. Hansen has said, we do have the ECHA assessment, we do have the assessment of the IIRC, which goes in the same direction. So we have a clear assessment, this is a cancerogenic substance, and all we want is a label, do not breathe dust or spray. And I think we should give workers, but also consumers, this level of information in order to prevent them from harm. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For ID, I have no speaker on the list. Okay. For ECR, no, it's for ID. Okay, please go ahead.
Oui, merci.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, our position is the one that we've supported for a long time, as you're well aware, on carcinogens. I'm not sure that it's through applying an objection that we can come back to the basic standards when it comes to labeling and, how should I put it, a revaluation of products. Everything should be going in the same direction to protect workers to a greater extent as possible, including through the companies. So we have to protect workers. It's not sure that through this objection we can make sure that we can protect workers sufficiently.
Anja Hazelkamp.
Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you, Chairman. Although we've taken the first step to classify titanium dioxide properly and warn consumers, fluid substances such as the paint are being left out of the picture. A balance has been struck between protecting public health and business life. That's the essential problem with this regulation. There's a need to protect our health, and you therefore can't make compromises with financial demands. The highest classification should apply to these carcinogens. You need a thorough, serious replacement strategy. The Commission hasn't had any democratic support from Parliament and the Member States for authorising GMOs. They push them through on the basis of being harmless. Now, they are required to follow the risk assessment committee in this instance. I really don't understand that, how our colleague could raise an objection and just brush aside consumers and workers' right to have the health protection. I cannot support this objection, which you know perfectly well has been written by the lobby.
Last speaker on my list, Peter Liese.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will speak in German. Ja, Frau Kollegin, das ist klar, dass wir...
Yes. Obviously, in the EPP, we are confronted with this every time that we want to fight cancer. So like the Greens, but we're very precise when it comes to looking at things. And recently, I spoke to the German Cancer Research Center, and there's a lot of research on the causes of cancer when it comes to the chemicals we're looking at. Couldn't pinpoint any deaths in the EU. We must take it very seriously. And our colleague asked specific questions. We said we'd reject it. We're happy to look at the specific points. The fact is, in Germany, though the organization dealing with the protection of employees, it says the exception is unnecessary. We have necessary rules to protect employees. And the Labour Minister, who is from the Socialist Party, says the same thing. We must see whether this helps really. I have three specific questions to the Commission. First of all, is it correct what the mover of the emission says, that there's the only evidence is with animals? Is there any evidence as regards humans? Can we send that to us in writing by tomorrow morning? In the Commission note says the effects on recycling will be minimum. But what are the effects that can be observed? Thirdly, how exact is the labelling? What is being labelled? There is a risk if there's no labelling. If it says because if you scrape off the paint, it might cause cancer. What exactly is being proposed? Employees need to know what they should do so that they're not exposed to this dust. There are certain more things which might be more problematic. So what type of labelling exactly will there be?
Thank you. So I will give the floor to the Commission. DG Envie to end this session on carbon dioxide.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to come here to discuss our decision to classify titanium dioxide as a carcinogen category 2. So as you very well know, the objective of the CLP regulation is to protect, to achieve a high level of protection of human health and the environment. And this is done through the identification of the hazards, so the intrinsic properties of the substances. There are two ways of classifying, either allowing industry to do self-classification or through a harmonized classification, which is initiated either by member states or by industry itself. The classification, labeling and packaging regulation indicates that for substances that are carcinogens, and in particular also category 2, harmonized classification is the right way forward. So the proposal that, the decision that we took was based on the opinion of the Risk Assessment Committee. INECA, as you know, is the science-based committee that looks into proposals by member states or by industry. And since the Risk Assessment Committee emitted its opinion, as some of you have rightly said, there has not been any single piece of new evidence that will put into question the decision of the Risk Assessment Committee. So the only science-based opinion that we have is that of RAC. So our classification, as I said, is based on RAC, but it's also in line with the conclusions that were achieved by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is a WHO agency that identified titanium dioxide as a possible carcinogen to humans. And it's also in line with other measures taken by the Commission in the European Union, such as to ban the use of titanium dioxide in nanoform in cosmetics that can be sprayed, also because they can be inhaled. So, so we believe that our decision is solid science-based. Let me just comment on the issue of whether the classification, labeling, and packaging is a better option compared to that of worker protection legislation. These two pieces of legislation are compatible. They are not incompatible. They are compatible and complementary. In fact, the fact that a substance has a harmonized classification under CLP allows, well, obliges industry to provide a safety data sheet when they are supplying the substance, which allows workers to properly handle the substance in a safe way. So it's the obligation of providing a safety data sheet that will trigger positive effects in worker protection. Additionally, harmonized classification assists the setting of exposure limit values under occupational health and safety legislation. But it's very important to note that the issues of titanium dioxide and the concerns that the use of titanium dioxide raises is not limited to worker protection. It's also an issue for the self-employed that are not covered by worker protection legislation, and an issue for consumers that may also be exposed to this substance. In terms of the consequences that our harmonized classification will have, it will improve the information on the hazardousness of the substance and help inform choices in terms of safer handling. It will also allow other legislation to take risk management measures to ensure the safety of the substance. It's important to note that harmonized classification only has to rely on the intrinsic properties of the substance, on the hazards of the substance, and not make considerations of the risk, that is, of exposure. Some of you have made, one of the honorable MEPs has made a reference to the fact that powder is an ambiguous term, and therefore will have problems of enforcement. I would like to remind that RAC recommended that the substance should be classified as carcinogen category 2 by inhalation. In the Commission decision, the substance is classified in powder form for particles with an aerodynamic diameter of equal or less of 10 micromillimeters. So we are given a specific diameter for these particles, which we consider responds to those particles that can be inhaled. So it's a very specific diameter, and hence this allows enforcement of the decision. There was a question whether we only had studies on animals. Indeed, we had studies on animals that I was mentioned before, have been provided by industry. And it's the fact of the relationship between the results on the study of animals and the potential to extrapolate this to humans that it was decided, that the RAC decided not to classify the substance as carcinogen 2, carcinogen 1B, but rather carcinogen 2. So the relationship between the studies on animals and the concerns for humans was already taken into account in the decision of the Risk Assessment Committee. What is being labeled was also asked, so the substance will have to be labeled, as well as the mixtures that are classified. Those are the mixtures in the powder form. There are mixtures that will not have to be classified according to our decision, and those will be the liquid mixtures, but they will have to be labeled. So although they are not classified, they will need to be labeled, and explain that they may contain respirable particles, and that it will be a warning attached to this label. And the warning will read, hazardous respirable dust may be formed when used, or droplets may be formed when used. Do not breathe it. So that is what will have to be labeled. And I think that's replying all the questions that you had. Just to conclude that for the new commission that just took office today, the fight against cancer is an important priority. And there is only one way to fight cancer, is to identify the substances that cause cancer. And without the